share it with you afterwards. So in fact, I'll email you a follow-up to today's session. So you'll have a link to the recording in case you want to look at anything again, or in case you want to share it with anyone else in your teams. Feel free to do that. And also, while we are just waiting we'll wait until just 5 past. While we're doing that, obviously this afternoon's webinar or workshop is more of a workshop. Is about emotional intelligence and how that's the key to really exceptional leadership. Certainly that's what I've experienced. Just an opportunity just to put into the chat. So hopefully you know where the chat button is, the chat box is. Let me just get it started. I'll put a message in there so you can see where it is. This is the chat. There we go. So it should be on your toolbar just on the left. Just if you wouldn't mind, just in the chat, what is something that you'd like to get from today's session? So coming in, perhaps there was something on your mind around emotional intelligence. Perhaps there's something specific that you're looking for. So if you wouldn't mind just dropping that in the chat, and I'll, as we go through the next 50 minutes or so together, I'll just make sure that I capture that, or at least aim to address what it is that you're hoping to get from this session as well, because without that, it could perhaps just be a bit generic. The other thing that's interesting, whenever you go into workshops like this, whenever I go into workshops like this, it's useful to just state an intent at the start, because it can be quite helpful to get you to think about what is it I am looking to do in this session, and what we're looking to get from it. Patrick's just joined us as well. Good afternoon, Patrick. In fact, I think it may be morning where you are, Patrick. I think you're in the US, aren't you?
Canada.
Brilliant. So you're in Canada, Patrick. Welcome. I think you get the award for being furthest from my location, which is in the UK. So thanks for joining us, Patrick. I appreciate it. Patrick, I'm just asking people just to drop into the chat, which is on the settings function on the bar on the settings bar here, just on the chat. One thing that you're looking to get from today's session, just to kind of give us a bit of focus for the content that we'll run through today.
Free coffee.
Free coffee. I wish I could help you with that, Patrick. I wish. If you were here with me, I'd definitely offer you that. And actually, Patrick, have you got any coffee at home that's free?
No, we're working on it.
Well, there you go. Maybe another day.
Yeah,
but if there's one thing that you're looking to get from today, Natalie, thanks for your sharing in the group. So to learn tips that I might not be aware of and a refresh. Brilliant. Excellent. Thanks, Natalie. I can hopefully we'll certainly get you a refresh on emotional intelligence, and hopefully there'll be some things in here that get you to think differently about emotional intelligence today. Thank you. That's great. Ali, thank you for your message. Positive ways to relieve stress and empathize with others. Nice. Okay. Thank you, Ali. Excellent. So positive ways to relieve stress, empathize with others. Good. Thank you for that. Gary, nothing particular, which I know won't help. I'm always looking to sharpen my blade. Excellent. Habit 7, Gary, of the 7 habits, right? Always sharpen the saw. Always be sharpening the saw. Love it. Okay. Good. Well, we are at 6 minutes past, so let's make a start. So the way I tend to run these sessions is that we start with a bit of content. So I'll probably talk for 15, 20 minutes on some content, and then we'll pause on the content sharing. And depending on the size of the group, we'll either then open it up to discussion and kind of think about what it is that you want to take from the session, or I might put you in a couple of breakout rooms. We might do a couple of breakout rooms today, because it would be 3 in each room, and that might be quite nice to then have a smaller discussion. Then we'll regroup, share some ideas and feedback, and then we'll close. And we'll aim to close just before 5 to the hour, so that you get a 5-minute window between this and your next session or appointment or meeting. Okay, so let me share my slides with you so that I can give you some idea of what we were planning to cover today. And thanks everyone for coming to the session today. I really appreciate you being here. So I'm on animation. Let me just share. Zoom did an update recently, and all the buttons look completely different to how they used to before. So it's interesting. There we go. Found it. Right. You should now be able to see my slides. So emotional intelligence, the key to exceptional leadership. These sessions, I run these sessions not every week, but most weeks I try and put something in the diary. The only weeks I don't do these is when I'm away, or there's some other commitment, or I've got too much client work on. But the whole idea of these sessions is an idea on a regular basis, and an opportunity just to pause, reflect, and just get some thinking space, because very often in our businesses we don't get a lot of thinking space. A lot of the time we are full on, racing from one task to another at 100 miles an hour. So hopefully this is an opportunity for you today to get 50 minutes where you can press the pause button on all that stuff that goes on and just think a bit more clearly about what it is you're working on in your business, perhaps some of the leadership topics. I've asked this question already, so what would you like to get from this workshop? As I said before, one of the reasons for asking this is just to get you to focus in as we start a workshop like this. There's a lot of evidence that shows if you're preempting what you're trying to learn from a session, actually you get more benefit from it, because you're kind of more focused on what it is you're trying to get out, rather than just attending on kind of default. So hopefully you've all got something that you're looking at today. And we'll look at emotional intelligence, what it is, why it's important. We'll look at the impact of emotional intelligence and how emotional states affect us and affect our teams, and then we'll look at how we develop it. So that's the idea for today's session. And just to put this in a broader context, so emotional intelligence in a leadership context is effectively how we manage ourselves and relationships with others. And I have this model that I work through when I think about leadership development, in particular when I think about coaching as a leadership style. Because when you look at the evidence around emotional intelligence, one of the key emotionally intelligent leadership styles is coaching. And coaching really does help you to build that emotional intelligence. And I use this model, and this model's in the book, Coaching Leaders. If any of you, I think Gary's got a copy. I know Gary's got a copy. I like to mention my books because I'm proud of them. Gary's got his hand up. Thank you, Gary. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the book, do have a look at the book, because in it we talk through a complete model. And when I first learned coaching, what I recognized was, if you look at the model on the screen here, what I recognized was that coaching's like a slice of the pie. It's like a slice of the pie when it comes to leadership, but there's a lot more to it than just coaching people. And what we have to do is make sure that we have a solid plan that we are clear on as a leader, that we can communicate to our teams so they can build their own plans that align with ours and the business's plan. We need to make sure that there is a foundation of trust and strong relationship with everyone we lead, so that they will, feel confident to lean into their role and perform at the highest level. We have to have a contract in place with everybody, so that, and I don't mean employment contract, I mean an agreement with each of our teams about how we'll operate and act together. Then we have to think about, once that contract's in place, have we agreed objectives and goals? Are people clear on what's expected of them? And are they clear on the delivery of best practice, high performance in their role? And that's done through the right objectives and goal setting. Then we have to create some space for them to do great work and observe them in action. And from there, because very often people will then kind of perform in their role on default, that creates a really good opportunity for us to start to recognize opportunities to coach them for change. That's where coaching fits. And you can use a coaching approach to all of these different stages, but really, performance coaching sits in that zone there once we've got the foundations of leadership in place. And then the final model in our coach process is the H, which is heroes in the making. And this is about development planning, getting people to think bigger and investing in their long-term kind of performance, potential, and succession within our business. And that's a roadmap for really effective leadership that we use as part of our coach model. And that kind of is the framework for the book. So do feel free to pick that book up and get it on Amazon. If anybody would like a digital copy, just email me after today and I'll happily send you a digital copy of the book so that you can read it on your tablet or laptop. Okay, so let's talk about emotional intelligence. Why is this important? Emotional intelligence is, I first learned about this, I was probably quite a way into my leadership career, and I read a really interesting book by a guy called Daniel Goleman. And Daniel Goleman is the architect of emotional intelligence. He and his research team actually mapped out what emotional intelligence is in a context of leadership. And if you look at, emotional intelligence, if you research it, you'll see Daniel Goleman and his research team, their name comes up a lot in the reference around emotional intelligence. But effectively what it is, it's this transition we make in leadership in businesses from managing tasks to starting to more effectively lead people. And that's a really good analogy for management versus leadership, that we manage tasks and activities, but we lead people. And when we start to lead people, one of the first, senior managers I worked for when I first moved into a leadership position, took me to one side once I'd been appointed and, did some briefing with me about the business and then said, Justin, managing the business is fairly straightforward. Where your problems and challenges will always come from are the people. It'll always be the people that cause you the most, sleepless nights, issues, aggravation, upset, disruption. And he was absolutely right. And for those of you leading teams, you'll know that that's the case. And really, when we start to think about leading teams, we have to think about emotional intelligence. And the first element of emotional intelligence, there are 5 areas that emotional intelligence focuses. The first one is actually becoming self-aware. So starting to recognize how we behave and react on default. And this is important because very often there'll be situations, there'll be people, there'll be things that happen in our businesses and in our roles as leaders that will trigger us or impact us. And actually starting to become aware of some of those triggers, some of the things that happen to us by default is really important, because we start to recognize an opportunity, a gap then to change. And that self-awareness is the first step. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but when I was in my last, very senior corporate role, I reported to a vice president, and he was really fiery, used to lose his temper really quickly with people, was very shouty and quite aggressive and almost bullying. And his awareness was really high. So he would almost forgive himself by saying, well, you all know what I'm like. This is it. You have to put up with it. Right. So first step of emotional intelligence, check. He was self-aware. The problem was that he didn't even consider the second step of emotional intelligence, or the second area, which is self-management. So once you become self-aware, it's then about understanding, how do I start to manage myself in those situations so that I don't go into default, so that I don't, shout at somebody unnecessarily, or I don't lose my temper or lose confidence or become anxious or whatever it is. So we move from the first step, which is I'm aware of certain situations that might impact me. Second step there is I start to manage myself in those situations. We'll talk about a couple of techniques to do that shortly. So self-awareness first, then I can start to self-manage. And this is a process. So this isn't something you do one time. It becomes something that, I'm aware I'm improving and self-managing. I become aware that I've perhaps made some progress, but under really high stressful situations, I resort to type. So I might need to go back and manage myself again. So really thinking about those 2 elements. And then the third element is what is referred to in the model as social awareness. So as well as becoming self-aware, I need to start to become aware of what's happening with people around me, with my teams, with my peers, maybe even with my manager, with customers and clients, starting to recognize, when do people perhaps, either tune out or start to look defensive, or perhaps have something else on their mind, so now might not be the right time. But starting to really become more aware of what other people are thinking, feeling, and sensing. And that's an intuition that we have to develop. This social awareness is an intuition. And as managers, coaching is one of the best ways to start to create social awareness, because we slow down, we take a bit more time, we become more observant, we ask more questions, we tune into the other person. That's a big part of the coaching approach. So we engage with other people, become more aware of what's happening for them. And then the fourth area of emotional intelligence, once we started to tune into other people and understand what's happening, is our ability then to respond and manage those different relationships as effectively as possible. So if I sense that somebody's upset, recognizing that becomes an opportunity for me as an emotionally intelligent leader to start to think, okay, how do I manage this more effectively? And if any of you have had dealings with team members who have been really upset, and I remember the first time it ever happened to me as a manager, and I was actually really surprised at how strongly the other person's emotions made me feel. So I had someone who had an incredibly difficult personal situation, brought it to me as their line manager, During the conversation, I was like, I really have to hold myself together so that I didn't get upset for that person. It's a really weird thing that happens. This communication loop, this connection we have with people. So very often, managing ourselves in some of those really tense, really difficult situations is a big part of emotional intelligence. It's also a big skill that we have to learn and develop. So managing the relationships, managing that interaction between us and them. And then the final area of emotional intelligence is motivation. And this is an area that was only actually developed as part of the emotional intelligence model fairly recently, like within the last 3 to 5 years. And what it recognizes is that over time in positions in organizations, motivation can wane. We can start to lose that passion, that energy for our work. And finding ways to rekindle, reignite, and sustain motivation for ourselves and our teams is really important as part of emotional intelligence. We need to not only manage ourselves, manage relationships with team, continually improve awareness. We also have to inspire and motivate people as part of our leadership responsibility. So really important that we get these 5 elements in place. And I talked about self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and then managing relationships. And I don't know if anybody's ever read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, but it's a brilliant book. And the first half of it is about his life, so surviving the concentration camps in the Second World War. The second half of the book, so Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist. The second part of the book is how this informed his psychiatry model, okay? And what he found was, and he really was the person that developed this principle about stimulus and response. The fact that when something happens, one of our team members approaches us, is upset, or we get put under pressure for a tight deadline, or whatever it is that happens, or something happens in our business, between that happening and us responding to it, there's a space. And the whole idea, and it really plays nicely with emotional intelligence, is that in that space, we have a power to choose the way we respond. And in that response lies, our opportunity to do something different, to grow, to create greater freedom for ourselves, to actually become more intentional about the way that we manage not only relationships, but managing ourselves in the business that we're operating in. So really useful kind of link between Viktor Frankl's work and emotional intelligence. And that was a long time ago. We're talking 50, 60 years ago. And then there's this principle when we're thinking that, following this thread around emotional intelligence about state contagion, and recognizing that our emotional states are contagious. I said about the first time I was in a really difficult conversation with somebody who, was visibly and quite rightly upset, and how actually it started to make me feel as if I could quite easily become upset through the conversation because of that. And it was state contagion at play. When we're in an emotional state, we tend to find that we will connect with somebody else, and the highest dominant emotional state will tend to influence the other person. Now, when we're in leadership positions, this is why emotional intelligence is so important, because we need to start to manage ourselves so that even when people are coming to us with, they might be really angry, or they might be really frustrated, or they might be anxious, or they might be upset, whatever their emotional states, our ability to hold our emotional state through emotional intelligence will eventually allow that other person to meet us where we are. So we start to become much more emotionally stable, and we can then influence that other person's emotional state so that they can stabilize and calm down through the conversation with us as leaders. And this is, if you've ever done this, you'll know how powerful it is, that sometimes we can just hold a sense of calm and people will follow us. And there's I can't remember the book, but there's a chapter in the book called Calm is Contagious. And it's a bit like this state contagion. If we can hold calm in different situations, it will be contagious to our teams. To Ali's point around how do we start to manage ourselves, manage stress. A big part of that is managing to be calm. And sometimes we might have to remind ourselves of the importance of staying calm in different situations. And then the kind of final thing I want to talk about is the communication mix, and thinking about how when we're communicating with people, there was this research study done by Dr. Albert Mehrabian, and he talked about when we're communicating, what is received, and recognizing that the elements of communication, what's received by somebody else, is that 7% of what we're communicating or receiving is the spoken word, what's actually said. 38% is the voice and the tonality, the way that the words are positioned to us. And the remaining 55% is body language. It's what we see from the other person and what we intuitively sense as they're communicating. So this is really important because if you look at the way that this is structured and the way that we think about delivery, 7% of what we say is conscious, i.e., we think about it. And the remaining kind of 93%, the way we say the words and the way that our body kind of transmits information is unconscious. It happens on autopilot without us really thinking about it. So when we think about where this plays with emotional intelligence, if we're feeling a certain way and we think about state contagion, communication ability, this stuff leaks out of us. It's leaking out of us all the time. So we have to learn to manage ourselves, manage, that gap between something happening and the way we respond and react. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in this situation where, all sorts of consequences happen and we'll be wondering how we get into different situations. And so that brings us to the final thing, and then I'll open it up to some conversations, and perhaps we'll open a couple of breakout rooms. It's just starting to think about how do we manage, we talk about emotional intelligence, how do we start to think about emotional self-control? There's two sequences I like to think about. So there's this event, reaction, outcome. Something happens, someone reacts or we react, and then from there an outcome happens. So once we've reacted, it's too late. We're now changing direction and we're going to get an outcome that perhaps isn't what we really wanted in a given situation. And what we have to do to start to develop emotional intelligence is switch the last two steps. So we have to recognize that things are going to come up. Stuff happens, right? So events happen. And when events happen, our job is not to react, it's to pause. So to learn to pause. And you'll all have seen people do this. Perhaps you'll do this yourself in certain situations. You don't immediately respond. You just take a beat. You might take a breath. Perhaps keep your mouth closed, stay silent, wait for 2 or 3 seconds. And in that 2 or 3 second space, think to yourself, what outcome do I want from this situation? So stuff happens. Pause. What outcome do I want? And from that position, once you're clear on, okay, the outcome I want from this situation is, perhaps it's to create a bit of time, not respond straight away. Maybe it's actually I want to get this person on board, or I need to get this person to switch their frame of reference from one frame of reference to another, maybe from negative to positive, for example. So how do I get someone to think positively? And from there, then you can respond much more effectively. So recognizing that we don't always have to react straight away, create some space, think about the outcome we want, and respond accordingly. Quite useful kind of ways of thinking of this stuff. I like this quote. I'll put it in here. So I'll read this quote and then we'll go into a discussion. So empathy depends not only on our ability to identify someone else's emotions, but also on our capacity to put ourselves in the other person's position and to experience an appropriate emotional response, one where we have true empathy for their situation, reflecting on it from where we stand. It's a really, really useful way to think about developing empathy and how we become more emotionally intelligent as leaders in our businesses. Okay, so there's a few things there. Hopefully that's got your minds thinking, got you suitably engaged and kind of inspired into thinking about this differently. We've had a couple of people join us since we started the session. So thank you to those of you who are with us. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up a couple of breakout rooms because we've got about 7 people. I'm going to open up a couple of breakout rooms, give you a chance to do a couple of things. One is to meet somebody new, hopefully a couple of new people, and then have a conversation about what you've discovered, what you're thinking about in terms of today's session, and what you might want to change going forward. So I'll give you a chance to have a chat with people in your group. We've got 2 random groups. I've let Zoom create those groups automatically. And when we regroup, if I can ask one person in the group just to share back. So if somebody wants to take a few notes in your conversation, just ask someone to share back your key takeaways, because that learning is useful for all of us to hear what other people are planning to do with today's session. And then we'll wrap up and close, take some feedback, wrap up and close by 5 to the hour. So we'll have 12 minutes in a breakout room. So I'll bring you back at about 20 to the hour. Okay, so open up the rooms, enjoy your conversation, enjoy meeting each other, and I'll see you back here in just over 10 minutes. Session is useful. So you've had a chance to discuss the kind of first half of the session, the topics that we discussed or reviewed, and then kind of thinking about what this means for you. So we've got a couple of rooms. We had Gary and Natalie. I think you had a lady called Bina with you, but she maybe dropped out.
Yeah. She didn't like us. So she went, I'm out of here.
Well, I was smiling at the one person that doesn't like you, Gary. I thought everybody liked you. That's really unusual. And then we had second room, which was Alison, Dorcas, and Patrick. Should we start with Natalie and Gary?
Yeah, Natalie, do you want to...
So basically, we were talking about how to contain yourself and your emotions when people come to you about different things. I find it very hard to detach myself from their whatever it is. So if someone came to me, for example, and said, you know, I've lost somebody, how do I contain those emotions?
Yeah.
And I find that really hard. So I wanted to kind of learn skills around that. And I was recommended some really good books on how that can change, and what I can look into going forward and stuff. And we were also talking about our actions and different ways in which we deal with people and talk to people. And because he's got his own coaching business and whatever, the importance of coaching around that as well. And, you know, perhaps everybody should do a coaching course or be aligned with a coach so that you can sometimes see things that you can't see yourself.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing.
Yeah. Useful. Thanks, Natalie. Did you the piece around how to, I guess, how to manage your emotions when someone comes to you with, you know, like a really emotional topic? What did you kind of think about any strategies for that, or is it more a work in progress?
That's going to be a work in progress for me.
Yeah.
Because I am very emotionally intelligent, really high on this spectrum. So I find it, sorry about that. Someone decides to drill when I'm on a call. So no, that's something that I'm going to have to work on myself, and I guess get a coach, because I'm doing a coaching course, and it might be that a coach can help me out doing those things. So I might lean on you, Justin, for that, actually.
Happy to have a conversation, Natalie. Happy to have a conversation. And think about, you know, so what you're really noticing is that your social awareness and connection with people is really high.
Yeah.
Right. As is your social management, you know, the management of the relationship. But the area that is, you know, for you, perhaps the priority is self-management, right? Yeah. So you've got 3 areas of emotional intelligence that are high, but you've got that self-management area that really is an area for focus. That's good. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Awareness is the first step to change, right? Once we're aware, we can change. Brilliant. Thank you. Gary, what would you like to add?
Well, I was saying to Natalie, well, when I first got into management, the manager you were talking about, the shouty sort of bullying type, that was me when I first got into, because that was the way I was taught, and actually I looked at other people as their role models. They got I thought was respect and results from the way that they operated. Yeah. And it's only when you start to understand yourself and actually these things don't land well, and actually I don't really want to be spoken to like that, so I shouldn't be speaking to other people like that. So that self-awareness comes in then, and then the self-management about actually when your default personality comes through. So my default personality would be to very much like that. So the self-awareness part is, and then my self-management is actually, you know what, how I've got to calm that down, my chimp, calm that down, put that in a box, and now be more emotionally intelligent in this conversation, rather than bringing my default triggers back into the conversation.
Yeah. Nice. Thanks,
Yeah.
Gary. Thank you. And you've mentioned the chimp there. There's the Chimp Paradox book by Professor Steve Peters. That's a great book as well.
Yeah.
Oh, look, Ali's got it. Ali's got it in front of her. Yeah, very good. Yes, it's a great book. I love
holiday reading that.
Have you not started it yet, Ali?
I've literally just got it. Just got it. Yeah, it's brand new. So yeah.
I think you'll love it. Yeah, it's really good. There's also a podcast interview with him on the High Performance Podcast with Damien and Jake, and it's a really good interview. I think it's one of the longer ones. It's like an hour and 45 minutes or something. It's a great discussion, and he talks through the principles of the book. It's really useful. Really useful. Good. Well, I hope you enjoy that.
Thank you.
So room 2 was Ali, Dorcas, and Patrick. Who'd like to share some of the headlines from your discussion?
So Patrick was hugely insightful, actually.
Good.
It was almost like we were jumped on a separate session because he was sharing some really valuable ways of reading people and kind of where he sits and how he deals with certain situations. Patrick, I don't know if you want to share some of what you shared with us, because I found that really useful. With how you.
Yeah. So I'll actually share something new I just thought of here. When you go into corporate meetings or you go into meetings with people, don't be the first person to speak. Do your preparation outside and then walk in. And what I do, so I'm a pretty high level negotiator. I've done work with the Harvard Group, the Stern School of Business, Columbia University, Columbia, and McGill, et cetera, a whole bunch of gang. And one of the things that all of us agree on around this whole area of being more effective is curiosity. So one of the ways that you activate that curiosity is walk into a meeting and just lay all of your things in front of you and look down, but listen with your eyes. Listen with your eyes. Listen to who is speaking to whom, who's leaning into who. So then you get a sense of if somebody's leaning into somebody, the person that's being leaned into is generally somebody who everybody's kind of watching, right? Because you get that sort of lead dog, if you will, in the Eskimo mush world. There always has to be one dog leading the pack, right? Second thing is just listening skills. I think listening skills are so underrated. I was mentioning to Allison and Dorcas that about 3 or 4 years ago, I went through what I would call a really big change. And the really big change was I stopped thinking ahead of people. So when Allison was speaking, I caught almost every word she said because I wasn't trying to be more intelligent than her. You see, I think the less intelligent you try and be, the more intelligence you will gain. So you'd say, well, how does that work? It works like this. If you put an MBA beside a person who is not an MBA, guess who's going to learn more? The person who is not the MBA, because they'll be watching, right? And they will be listening with their eyes. Last thing is gratefulness. I think that gratefulness is the most misunderstood emotional state that any of us have. And I was mentioning to our breakout that mentally you can't be in two places at the same time. So you cannot be negative and positive at the same time. I think the only guy that's really been able to accomplish this is Putin. And he's doing a brilliant job. The man is totally psychotic, right? So we could probably throw Elon Musk in there as well. That man, he's a little detached. But here's the thing. If you're having a moment where somebody is approaching you and they're really angry or frustrated, don't fill the silence. Let them get to the point where they realize that their effectiveness is falling off. And then just quietly look down and say, would you please be seated? A very peaceful voice. I actually went through that, and the guy was so angry, the whole office could hear. And he's a big dude, and he had pain problems, really bad ones. And he came into my office, exploded, and I said, please sit down. We talked it out. About 15 to 20 years later, I get a call from this guy. His name is Les Bridgen, by the way, so I'll tell you who he is. And he called me and he said, you know what, Pat? he said, you were you were the most professional manager in the organization. Not because I was more professional than everybody else, it's because I took the time to allow him to finish rather than intercepting and rerouting. See, if you look at behavioral change, you sell tell, you participate, and then you delegate. So I had to get to go through those 3 first steps before I could delegate his position back to him so he could go be caught.
Nice. But it starts with your ability to manage yourself, Patrick, right? And create that space, listen.
Yeah, it is, but it's also being aware that there's a lot of fire in the air. See, some people aren't aware. Like, so somebody will come into your office and they'll blow up and you'll sit there and look at them and say, you're an idiot. Now, you may think that inside, but that doesn't get anybody any ground. It doesn't get anybody any gain. To me, this is superior management. And regarding being loud, I think if you want to be the most effective manager, speak the least. Share and coach, but let the other side, because as a manager, we want to learn about them. They want to learn about us. They want to learn about how it is that we got to where we got to fast. But as a manager, you want to learn about them so that you can empower them.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Thanks, Patrick. Really useful insights. Really useful. Ali, anything else that you wanted to add?
No, so obviously we spoke a little bit more, actually elaborated on a bit more when we were in the breakout room with Pat. But what I was saying was, kind of everything we need to do, empathize, be curious, blah, blah, blah. It all comes from us and how we process things in our mind. So obviously you can be judgy. We said you can't judge people because that automatically then triggers a thought process that might not be the right process. So, it's almost that not judging and just being more sage in your brain, I guess, using that more sage approach, because that will allow you to do all of this. That will allow you to embrace all of the emotional intelligence side. If you're more sage, if you're not, then it's kind of that saboteur versus saboteur, isn't it? Where you bring out the worst. If you're bad, you bring out the worst in somebody else. You're not going to get the best out of them. So yeah, that's all I will probably add at this point. But Patrick, it's been a pleasure listening to you. It really has.
Oh, I know.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I'll leave you with one more thing. So the other thing I was thinking about, Alison, was this whole issue of bias. Honest to God, folks, we're all 88, 90% biased. You can't be unbiased. That's your legacy. You're standing on your parents' shoulders. They're standing on their parents' shoulders. So we're immersed in this, right? And I actually think that's going to be a big problem with AI, because it is going to be so biased, it's unbelievable. Because it's taking the collection of everybody's biases and create this new ultra bias. And I was mentioning to the group, Justin, that I actually think that the way that you're going to be a survivor of AI is to become much more simplistic. In other words, say more with less, use smaller words. The other thing is, in business, in any practice, make sure you understand your point of difference and that you're able to articulate that through a SWOT analysis. I don't know if you guys have ever done that. If you want to do something really cool, so I'm one of the few guys in the negotiation sales space who is ring-fenced the SWOT analysis. I SWOT my company, me, I SWOT my competitor, and I SWOT my customer. And when you bring those 3 pieces together, what you're going to find is when you look at your competitor, you're looking at their proposal. When you look at your customer, you're looking at their needs. And when you look at yourself, you're looking at your high self-interest. And somehow you have to backfill that expectation gap. Otherwise, you're never going to get a deal done.
Yeah, very good. I've got it's interesting. I have a planning template, and the planning template is effectively a sales SWOT analysis, but it's a slightly different twist on it. It kind of talks about market, customer versus kind of internal, external for the customer and for your
Yeah,
own.
I do something.
It's very similar.
Yeah, I do something. Yeah, quite similar. So here's the one, guys. You want to have some fun with yourself? Do a SWOT analysis on your career. Oh, try and lie to yourself. That ain't pretty. Because if you can lie to yourself, then you know you're a psychotic. And I want to leave you with something. The problem with normal is it always gets worse.
Oh dear, oh dear. Right, let's pop everybody.
Regarding time, today is only yesterday's tomorrow. It's a bad news.
I got a feeling you could do this all day, Patrick.
I'm there. I'm there.
Yeah. Okay, let me send a couple of things into the chat. First thing into the chat is this is a scorecard that we use in the business to help leaders to start to think about their leadership approach and how they can start to adjust and become more coaching led. So it's a free assessment. If you'd like to take it, please feel free to do so. Second thing is, if anybody would like to schedule a one-to-one, then this is a link to my diary. So this is a kind of 45-minute discovery session. If anybody wants to talk more about today's content or anything else that you've got going on that you think I might be able to help you with, feel free to look at that. You might have to wait a couple of weeks to get into my diary just because of commitments and stuff, but do feel free to either take the assessment, or if you'd like to schedule a one-to-one, then you are very welcome to do so. It just remains for me to say, we're at 4 minutes to the hour. Let's wrap up so that you're not pushed for your 2 o'clocks if you're in the UK. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. Really, really useful discussion, really enjoyable discussions and feedback as well. I hope you're all excited about trying and developing your emotional intelligence. And I look forward to seeing you on a future session.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Good to see you all. Thanks, you too.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone. Take care.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.